Right, now I've got to get rid of there's a bar at the top of the screen at the moment that's preventing me starting the slideshow. So I can get rid of that. Oh, I've just moved it, that's all right. Fine. Right. I've got an annoying bar. Have you all got an annoying bar at the top?
No, we can see it. We can see it fine. I can see it
Okay,
fine.
that's all right. Well, I needn't worry about that then. Right, thanks very much. So I'm just going to start my stopwatch so I know where I am time-wise. Right, okay, so this is the book I wrote, which was published in 2020, just before lockdown. And it's a field guide which should enable you to identify caterpillars of the larger moths and butterflies that you are likely to find. And also there's an extensive introductory section which deals, amongst other things, with much of what I'm going to talk about this evening. So thank you very much for asking me along. And right, so this is one of the principal predators of butterflies and moths and their caterpillars, birds. And it's estimated that in Britain and Ireland alone, blue-tipped chicks, so just blue-tipped chicks, eat 50 billion caterpillars a year. So there's a terrific amount of predation going on. And so over millions of years, the caterpillars have been trying to become more and more, make it more and more difficult for the birds to find them and eat them. And aside to that, the birds have developed ways in which they become better and better at finding the caterpillars. So there's this traditional evolutionary arms race going on. And it's an unequal struggle, really, because if the bird loses out on any bird caterpillar interaction, if the bird loses out, it loses a meal. If the caterpillar or butterfly or moth misses out, it loses its life. So all these factors put together have led to a remarkable variety of different mechanisms by which they try to avoid being predated. So one of the simplest things is you can be green on a green leaf. This is a caterpillar of the winter moth. The winter moth is what you'll see on perhaps a warmer night than this. If you're driving around the country lanes at this time of year, you see moths flying in front of the car headlights. That'll be the winter moth. And their caterpillars must form a huge part of the diet of baby birds in the spring. Anyway, so they are green on a green leaf, but also they make a spinning. So they spin leaves together and hide within. It's not a very strong spinning, but nevertheless, as you'll know from all the moths you see flying in your headlights in the winter, it's pretty successful. But there's a much better spinning now. So this is really quite a tough spinning here in amongst these willow leaves. And if we open that up, there's a caterpillar here of the small chocolate tip. This one doesn't actually occur in Devon, but anyway, it demonstrates nicely the defense of hiding in spun leaves. And you can blend in with the environment. So this is a moth here called the large ranunculus, which is resting on a lichen-coloured bark of a tree. And it's really blends in pretty jolly well, really, doesn't it? I'm sure you've worked out where the moth is by now, but I'll just outline it with the cursor. So it's here. Okay. So quite difficult to see. And here's another one that hides in plain sight, really. This is the spring usher. So this one will be starting to fly, just probably less than a month's time. They come out in February, just into March. So this is the spring usher. And again, jolly difficult to see on the bark of this tree. Now, there's a caterpillar here that feeds on lichens. can you see the caterpillar? I'll just give you a moment or two to try and work out where it is, but it's quite a remarkable bit of camouflage, really. So this is a caterpillar of a moth called the Brussels lace, which actually feeds on lichen and looks very much like the lichen. So I'll show you where it is now. So this is the head of the caterpillar here, and this is the body here. This is the tail end of the caterpillar here. So it's quite amazing, really. And the other thing about it is, as the shade of the lichen changes, then the color of the body is different, of the caterpillar is different as well. So if we look at the next one, here's the same caterpillar on a slightly different shade of green, and again, very difficult to see. So the head of the caterpillar is here. Here's the caterpillar itself, and the rear end's there. So really be very difficult for a bird to spot that. And can you see the caterpillar here? I mean, this is a caterpillar of the red underwing moth, which feeds on the leaves of willows and poplars. And it feeds at night, and by day it hides itself on the bark of the trunk or maybe a branch of the tree. But this one would come right down to the base of the tree. And when I found it, I thought I couldn't work out what it was. I actually had to touch it to realize it was a caterpillar, and went away and came back with some other people to show them. And then I thought it had gone, but eventually somebody said, oh no, look, there it is. But this is remarkable, really, because not only does it look the same color as the bark of the tree, but it's all orientated itself along the contours of the bark. So here's the head, body down here. So we'll crop the image to make it a bit more obvious. And this is a big caterpillar now. It's no small thing. It's one of our biggest. We crop it again, then you can see the caterpillar in its full glory. So very, very difficult to see. And then this is caterpillar of a moth called the blotched emerald, which actually sticks bits of vegetation to itself. So it feeds on oak. And here's the head of the caterpillar here, the body here, arching over, and here's the rear end, and it's stuck these bits of oak bud scale to little spiky hairs it's got. So it really does make it jolly difficult to see. And here's the blotched emerald, a beautiful moth. And in Britain, we used to have a moth called the Essex emerald, which fed on sea wormwood, and it did the same trick with its food plant. It would stick bits of sea wormwood to itself, making it difficult to see. But sadly, that species is extinct in this country now. But what I've noticed is that some other members of this group of moth sea emeralds do a sort of similar thing, but this is the larva of the large emerald during its diapause. Diapause is a dormant state where it spends the winter. So it spun some silk threads around the birch twig here, which it's attached itself to. So it's clinging on to these silk threads. And actually these green bits on the body here are not markings, they're actually algae that's on the body of the caterpillar. So it's interesting that it's in the same group as the blotched emerald and Essex emerald, and has got these algae stuck to the surface of the body. And in the spring it sheds its skin, takes on this other different appearance and carries on feeding. There's the large emerald. Then this is the common emerald, again in the same group, and again this is the diapausing in the star, and you can see all these green bits. These are algae that are stuck to the skin, and it's got an unusual skin. It's got lots of so I go back. It's got lots of little projections on it, tiny sort of microscopic projections, which make the skin effectively sticky. And so the algae adhere to the skin. You can see it along the back here. It's quite a rough appearance to it. Yeah. And there in the spring again, it sheds its skin, takes on a different appearance and carries on feeding. And this is a different moth, though. This isn't in this group of moths, the emeralds. It's still in the same family of moths, the Geometridae, but it's not in that group, the emeralds, which have these bits of plant and algae attached to them. So this is the brimstone moth caterpillar, and this is a larva that's spending the winter as a larva. It's this grey-brown colour, but it's got this green on it, looking like algae. So it's looking like an alga-covered twig. But in this case, the skin is perfectly smooth, and there's no algae there at all. It's simply green coloration on the skin. So same trick, but created in a different way. This is a moth called the scarce silverlines, and it spends a lot of time as a caterpillar. So it's about 10 months as a caterpillar, and it goes through all the seasons, really. So the remarkable thing is it changes its appearance through each season to remain as camouflaged as it can. So this is late summer, feeding underneath an oak leaf, and you can see how it feeds here. And it's essentially a green caterpillar on a green leaf. But then when the leaves fall, it spins some silk, it attaches itself to an oak twig and takes on this appearance. So it's grey-brown colour now, and it's developed this sort of brown saddle, which looks rather like a leaf scar or a bud on the oak. So that's how it spends the winter. Then in the spring, it sheds its skin, starts feeding on, starts feeding on the expanding oak bud. And you can see now, here's the oak bud, there's the green oak flowers coming out here and leaf, and there's the reddish brown bud scales, and here's the caterpillar, which is green, but it's developed this reddish brown stripe down the side and also on the back. So it looks very much like the opening bud of an oak. And then later on, when the leaves are all expanded, it takes on this appearance. So again, we're back to a green caterpillar on a green leaf. There is the scarce silverlines. This is another highly cryptic larva. This is a moth called the wormwood, which doesn't actually occur in Devon. But it feeds on wormwood and will feed on mugwort as well, which, as you know, has these sort of dead brown flowers like this. And so the caterpillar is green with these brown markings, looking just like the dead flowers, developing seed heads of the wormwood. This one's the plain pug. So it's feeding on the seeds of orac. And here it is, here's the caterpillar here like this. And really, it's very difficult to see amongst the fruits. And here's a fruit here with a hole in it, which is how I managed to locate the caterpillar. I know it's just a hole in the fruit. But look, there's a caterpillar here, which is resting in a sort of circle, and it's with a sort of hole. So it's creating the impression of a hole, just like the hole in the Atriplex orac fruit. So whether that's significant or not, I'm not sure. But anyway, in any event, they're very well camouflaged on this plant. Right, this is a moth, a micromoth actually, though it's one of the biggest of the micromoths, called Ipsilopha macronella, which overwinters as an adult. And here's one in amongst some dead leaves and stems of wood smallreed. Can you see the moth? I'll just leave you a few moments to try and locate the moth yourself. Don't forget, the birds aren't staring at a screen like you are. They're hopping around at high speed as they do. And, you know, may get brief glimpses of their potential prey, which may be partially obscured by leaves, or they might be in dappled light. So it's going to be harder in many ways for a bird to spot these things than it is for you staring at the screen. Right, so we're going to crop the image. There's the moth there, so we'll crop the image now, and there it is. So very, very difficult to see. This is a big moth now, and really it's extraordinary how it's evolved. This is the lappet moth, looking just like a dead oak leaf. So we've got the sort of dome of the thorax here, and then we've got the dorsum of the wing, which has got this convoluted appearance around the termen. And then unusually the hind wing is sticking out underneath the costa of the forewing, again giving this sort of scalloped appearance. So it's looking really very like a dead oak leaf. And the labial palps here are extended, darkened, looking very like the petiole of the oak. So this is a really big moth. And then the buff tip, very common, but when you're wandering around the countryside, you don't really come across them, do you? I mean, they must just be good at hiding. So here it is doing its trick, looking like a broken birch twig. So we'll crop the image and have a better look at exactly what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, it's quite amazing really, isn't it? So here we are. So here's a birch twig. You've got the grey, dark grey appearance here of the oak twig, just like we have here on the buff tip. And then you've got this whitish grey lichen that's growing on the birch twig. And we've got this whitish grey appearance on the moth. So it's not only looking like a birch twig, but it's looking like a lichen coloured birch twig. And you've got the head and thorax, front of the thorax here with this buff coloration, and the wingtip with this buff coloration, looking like the broken ends of the birch twig. And if you look here, you've got this dark, light, dark appearance. And again here, dark, light, dark appearance. And if you look at the broken bark here, you've got it dark, light, dark, dark, light, dark. So the level of accuracy which evolution has produced is quite astonishing, really. And convergent evolution. So this is a the buff tip's quite a big moth, really, but this is a really small moth. This is amongst the micro moths. This is a moth called Pseudoswamodamia combinella, which is doing the same trick. So you've got the sort of darker grey and the lighter grey on the forewing. You've got the buff tip like this. In this case, the head and thorax are whitish, but I mean, because it's such a small moth, the imitation can't be as good because you simply haven't got the surface area to play around with. But as you can see, it's effectively convergently evolved the same defense mechanism. This is caterpillar of a moth called the September thorn. Here we are, looking very like a twig, an oak twig, and it's got these markings and projections on it. And there's a leaf scar there, okay, where last year's leaf has fallen off, which looks really very like that, doesn't it? And then there's these bits that stick out, which look rather like buds or projections on the twig. So again, you know, it's very difficult for a bird to find that. There's another good imitation of a leaf scar there. This is another of the thorns. So this is the early thorn now. So looks very like a twig. The head and the first two thoracic segments are bent backwards. This is the third thoracic segment here, which sticks its legs out there, which look very much like a thorn or a bud on the twig that it would be pretending to be. So there we are. So a bird seeing it like that's going to maybe pass it by thinking it's a twig. But if a bird is looking this way on from underneath, it'll see this. So remember, the front of the the head and the first two thoracic segments are angled out the way. So it's exposing these true legs on the third thoracic segment, and they do really look rather like the biting jaws of an insect. So hopefully that'll frighten away whatever predators may be around. There's a sort of dual mechanism going on here. Then there's the cinnabar moth. You're probably all familiar with these caterpillars that feed on ragwort. Very brightly coloured, yellow and black, and they set out in the open and almost inviting being eaten. But the thing is that if a bird were to try one of these, it would quickly realise that they're not good to eat, they're distasteful, and would learn to avoid them. And furthermore, there's a sort of mimicry really with the hornets and wasps. So this is what we call Müllerian mimicry, where more than one species have come to take on a similar appearance, and they're both harmful. So the cinnabar caterpillar is quite toxic, and the wasps and the hornets can sting. So they're harmful things, and the birds have to learn to avoid them. But by mimicking each other, it means that the birds take less of each before they've learnt to leave them alone. So this is the familiar cinnabar moth caterpillar. And so this is brightly coloured. It's warning the birds that it's distasteful. And there's the adult, again, warningly coloured. So we call these aposematic, brightly coloured, injurious species. And the birds do avoid them. And there's another aposematic moth. This is the six-spot burnet moth, again, brightly coloured. It's got cyanide in the body. It's not good to eat. And so the birds should leave them alone. But there is one bird that specialises in eating these toxic things. And this is a paper I was involved in. So it's using molecular and crowdsourcing methods to assess breeding ground diet of a migratory brood parasite of conservation concern. So the migratory brood parasite is the cuckoo. The molecular method was analysing DNA from cuckoo droppings, and the crowdsourcing method was where I came in, because the chap who was doing a PhD picked pictures off the internet of cuckoos with caterpillars in their beaks, and my task was to identify the caterpillars. So, but it's quite amazing really. There were very few where they didn't have any toxic caterpillar in the beak. So they not only can they cope with toxic caterpillars, but they seem to positively want to eat them, including this thing. So this is the brown tail moth, and it's in the family Erebidae, but within the family Erebidae, the subfamily Limantridae have caterpillars with irritant hairs. This is the ultimate really in this country, the brown tail moth. And it's not really these long hairs so much as these cushions, these brown cushions here. And it's variously quoted that each caterpillar has between 500,000 and 2 million of these tiny nettling hairs that are 0.5 millimeter long. And they're on these are the hairs that make up these cushions. And they're really incredibly irritant. And yet the cuckoo will take them. This is another caterpillar in the same subfamily. This is the vapora moth. And again, highly irritant hairs. But I want you to just note the arrangement of the hairs. You've got 4 tufts on the back here. You've got 2 tufts sticking forward here. You've got a couple of tufts on the side, and you've got this tuft on the back here. So birds will learn to leave them alone. But then we've got this thing. Now this is a completely different family of moths, but yet the caterpillar's got many of the same features. It's got these forward-facing tufts here. It's got tufts on the back here, although not quite so many. And it's got a tuft at the rear end here. So this is a caterpillar of a moth called the nut tree tussock. And if we see them side by side, you can see how similar they are. I mean, they're quite variable in coloration, these things, but in this particular case, the body color is pretty much the same in both individuals. So this is what we call Batesian mimicry. So this caterpillar, the nut tree tussock, would be good to eat. It'd be a good prey item for a bird, but they may think that it's actually a vapor moth caterpillar and leave it alone. So it's a palatable species that's mimicking an injurious species, and we call that Batesian mimicry. And this is a drinker moth caterpillar. This is in the family Lasiocampidae. And again, the Lasiocampidae have these irritant hairs. And in fact, with the cuckoo study, because these drinker moth caterpillars are big, I mean, it's a good food source if you can tolerate it. So they're big and they're becoming fully fed in late spring. So, you know, it's ideal for when the cuckoos have arrived. And the cuckoos in Devon certainly were taking these as their major prey item. Then we've got a very hairy caterpillar here, the garden tiger moth, but they don't seem to be particularly irritant, these hairs. I don't think they're irritant at all, really. But it's very, very hairy, and it may just be that the hairs create a sort of physical problem for the birds to get hold of the caterpillar. Now, don't worry, your screen should have gone black now. Did you notice the moth in the last picture? Right, well, I'll show it to you again. But the point about the screen going black is that the birds aren't staring at the screen like you are. They're hopping around at high speed, as I've said before, seeing things maybe in dappled light, with the moth or caterpillar partially obscured by twigs and bits of leaf and that sort of thing. So there we are. It just leaves you a moment or two to try and locate the moth. So the moth is here. So this is the Chinese character, and it's mimicking a bird dropping. And bird dropping mimicry is very common, very widespread amongst all sorts of invertebrates. And indeed, really quite widespread in the moths, but only in moths that are about the right size. So this is one of the smaller of our, what we call the macro moths, the larger moths. And then there's the micro moths, which is not a biological distinction at all, but in general, the micro moths are smaller than the macro moths. They're just less well studied. But there's a family of moths in the micro moths, the Tortricidae, which is just about the right size to get away with trying to be a bird dropping. So there's several of them look like bird droppings. Anyway, we'll crop the image so you can see it a bit better. That's the moth there. And really looks very like a bird dropping. And that's the moth sideways on. Still looking like a bird dropping, perhaps a little less convincing. So this is a caterpillar now that's been making the bird dropping, and that's a fabulous imitation of a bird dropping, isn't it, really? I mean, it's just amazing how evolution has got to that. But this is a much bigger moth than the Chinese character. And as I said, you can only get away with pretending to be a bird dropping if you're about the same size as a bird dropping. And the trouble is that this caterpillar, when it's fully fed or in its last instar, is just too big to get away with it. So it sheds its skin and takes on a different appearance. So one day it'll look like this, and then the next day it sheds its skin and it looks like that. It's the same caterpillar. It's just shed its skin, taken on a different appearance. And now it's got this black and yellow striped appearance. I suspect that it tastes fine, and it's a Batesian mimic of the sort of wasp, hornet, cinnabar moth, Müllerian mimicry complex. But I must admit I haven't tasted one. And there's the older moth itself, the actual moth. Right, now here's another one. Interesting to hear what you make of this. This is the comma butterfly now. So this is an early instar. I think that's possibly looking like a bird dropping. But when it's in its final instar, it would be too big to get away with being a bird dropping, except that I think that that may be a bird dropping mimic. Certainly some of the textbooks say it is. But in a sense, it's only part of the caterpillar pretending to be a bird dropping. The whole thing's too big. So, but the other curious thing about it is when I find these things, they're always on the underside of the leaf, where a bird's dropping would never be. Maybe that doesn't matter. I don't know. The thing is that much of the evidence for what I'm saying is circumstantial. I mean, in other words, you could do an experiment which shows that birds tend to avoid caterpillars with a particular appearance, but you can't design one which shows that they avoid it because it looks like a bird dropping. So you have to make up your own mind to an extent on this one. But I don't think anybody would deny that the older moth caterpillar is mimicking a bird's dropping. But the evidence is circumstantial. Right, and here's another one. So I think that's a bird's dropping mimic. So this is sort of different, though. It's not the black and white bird's dropping, it's a sort of brown bird dropping, isn't it? And this is the scalloped hook tip, which is particularly common on heathland. And here it is sitting exposed on the top of a birch leaf, having eaten away part of the surface of the leaf. And I think this is a mimic of an insectivorous birds dropping. Insectivorous birds, particularly common on heathland, and you'll know yourselves that some of their droppings are sort of brown and they contain a lot of exoskeletons of insects. And so I think that's what's going on here. But again, when it's in its final instar, it can't get away with it anymore, so it takes on a different appearance. That's a scalloped hook tip. We don't often find moths resting as we walk around the countryside, do we? They do a pretty good job of hiding, but this one I did find looking rather like a dead birch leaf, really. And if we crop it, that's the scalloped hook tip. And here's another one that I think is looking a bit like an insectivorous bird dropping. So this is the peach blossom moth. Again, this is an early instar, but when it's in the final instar, it can't get away with it anymore, so it takes on a different appearance. That's the rather stunningly beautiful peach blossom moth. And here's another Batesian mimic. So this is the lunar hornet moth. Pretty common in Devon, actually, but you don't easily come across the adults. You have to look for willow trees. So it's pretty much grey willow and goat willow. And if you notice at the base of the trees, there are holes about 1 centimetre in diameter where moths have come out before. You'll know that the tree is infested, or at least has been infested. And the caterpillars feed on the living wood for 2 or 3 years. And then conveniently, about 8:30 in the morning, they emerge in the last few days of June, first couple of weeks of July. And so you go along to one of these trees at 9 o'clock in the morning and you can find them sitting around having just emerged. But I mean, this is a big moth now. It's about the size of a hornet. It's got clear wings like a hornet. It's got the yellow and black body pattern. And when it flies, it sort of buzzes and has a very fast wing beat. So it's a really very good mimic of a hornet. So this is Batesian mimicry again. And the female just hangs around until a male has appeared and they mate, and then and then he flies off and she'll lay a few eggs where she's been, and then she'll fly off and find somewhere else to lay some eggs. There's another mating pair. This is all from a tree in our village, which produced a lot of moths actually over the years, up to 30 a year at its peak, but the tree's now sadly died. And it was a big old goat willow, so whether it died naturally or whether it died as a consequence of all the lunar hornet moths in the trunk, I'm not sure. And when our son lived in Bedford, I noticed all these holes around the base of a poplar tree. And these holes are pretty common on the poplars around Bedford. This is suburban Bedford. And I thought, well, I know what's done that. So this is the hornet moth, which we don't get in Devon, but it does a similar thing on poplars. And it's even more spectacular than the lunar hornet moth, really, because it's got these yellow taculae here, and it's slightly bigger. And here's the male with its clear wings, having flown in. The female's just emerged. She hasn't flown yet. And she's got these sort of sun scales on the wing here, which are deciduous, and they'll just fall off as soon as she flies for the first time. And again, they do the same thing. The female comes out early in the morning, and here we are. And I've managed to take a video, so we'll just run the video now. And so she hangs around until a male appears. And here we are, there's a male just appearing around the tree now. Found her by the scent she's giving off, the pheromone. He's working out where she is. Here the cars in the background. So shame we don't get them in Devon, but they're pretty common around Bedford, that's for sure. Good. Right, and here's another member of this group of moths, the clearwing moths. This is the yellow-legged clearwing. So it's the same family, and it's much smaller, but again, it's clearly a wasp mimic. You know, yellow and black, clear wings. Yeah, very good. And another one, this is the six-belted clearwing. All these clearwing moths fly by day. This one's pretty common, actually. The caterpillars feed in the roots of bird's foot trefoil and kidney vetch and horseshoe vetch. We don't get much of that in Devon. And, you know, you might be able to just spot one when you're out and about. You know, even roadside verges where bird's foot trefoil is growing can reveal these moths. But there are pheromone lures available now, which you can use to attract them. And yeah, but it's surprising how common they are and yet difficult to see. And now there's another mimic here. This is a bumblebee mimic. Probably, I think it looks most like the common carder bee. This is the narrow-bordered bee hawk moth. And this one's just emerged. So all these light grey scales here are deciduous, and they will fall off as soon as the moth flies. Here we are, so you've got a mating pair here with the very clear wings. All those deciduous scales have fallen off. There's one nectaring on bluebell. We've got another bit of video here. So it's, you know, it's a really good bumblebee mimic. But of course, these things hover. I mean, the bumblebees don't. They land on the flower, don't they? But very strong flyers. They hurtle around at high speed. Okay. And there's another one. This is the broad-bordered bee hawk moth now, which doesn't occur in Devon. Not quite sure why. It occurs in Dorset, and its larvae feed on honeysuckle and it does the same sort of thing as day-flying moth that's a bumblebee mimic. This is a caterpillar of the lobster moth. Lobster moth's interesting in all sorts of ways. This is its second instar. You know, an instar is the stage between successive sheds of the skin, or between the coming out of the egg and shedding its first skin, or between the when it being fully fed or shedding its skin for the last time as a caterpillar, and then shedding its skin to pupate. But this is a second instar. So the first instar larva looks pretty much the same, but doesn't eat any leaves at all. All the first instar eats is the eggshell it came out of. It has to eat that eggshell, and then it sheds its skin, and then it starts to eat. So this is actually the second instar. And it's got these bizarrely elongated true legs, and looks rather ant-like, really. And the other end of the body, it's got these sort of tails like this, which look a bit like an ant as well. So it's almost as if it looking like an ant at both ends of the body. In fact, there is a caterpillar in the tropics that undoubtedly is mimicking an ant, but at both ends of the body. So, so this is its defense as a small larva. And then this is the fully fed larva. You can see it's still got these long legs, and these tails have developed a bit more. But we'll come on to the lobster moth again later, but it's a truly weird larva. And when it's disturbed, it splays out its legs like this. And you can see here, there's a little gland on the first thoracic segment, which is said to be able to squirt out formic acid at a predator. Now, this isn't a UK caterpillar. This is a hawk moth from the jungle of Costa Rica called Hemeroplanes triptolemus. And I show this because I think I'd be surprised if anybody denies that that's mimicking a snake. Now, I'm going to talk quite a bit about snake mimicry in the next few minutes. So we just need to get our heads around it, really. So we've learnt that caterpillars can mimic, or moths can mimic, injurious insects like wasps and hornets, and the birds can learn to avoid the wasps and hornets by getting stung, having tried a few. And we've also learnt that bird dropping mimicry is common, but that the moth or caterpillar that's mimicking a bird dropping has to be about the same size to get away with it. So, although this is a big caterpillar, I mean, hawk moths are probably amongst our biggest caterpillars, it's still going to be smaller than a snake. So it seems that size doesn't really matter when it comes to snake mimicry. And also, there really isn't that learning opportunity like there is with wasps and hornets, because the first bird-snake interaction is likely to be the last one. So there's no learning opportunity, and it doesn't seem to matter about the size. So the idea is that this is an innate fear of snakes that the birds have. So in other words, they're, from the moment they come out of the egg, they've got this hardwired, crude image of a snake within their brains. It may be not at the level of consciousness, but there's a crude image there which various visual cues will trigger, and then they'll avoid the snake or anything that looks like a snake. And this is amazing, really, because this caterpillar, when it's at rest, is stretched out along the twig and looks like any other caterpillar. And when it's disturbed, then it lets go with the front end, twists itself over, because this is the underneath of the thorax that's pretending to be a snake here at the front. And it'll even lunge like a snake. So it's quite amazing, really. So although, again, you have to accept that the evidence is circumstantial, you might be able to do an experiment to show that birds avoid caterpillars that look like this, but you can't do one to say it's because it looks like a snake. Now, I have to thank Professor Daniel Jansen from the University of Pennsylvania for providing me with this photo and allowing me to use it. When I started developing some ideas about snake mimicry within our British caterpillars, I contacted him because I needed, when I gave talks or in the caterpillar book I mentioned earlier, I needed to use an image of this caterpillar as the starting point of the snake mimicry argument. And he very kindly allowed me to do so and sent me a paper that he'd written on his research in the jungle of Costa Rica. And there's all sorts of caterpillars out there that mimic snakes, and there's even pupae, chrysalids out there that mimic snakes. In fact, if you Google snake mimicking caterpillars, you'll see there's a huge array of them, mainly from the tropics, but not exclusively, and also pupae as well. In fact, if you put Daniel Jansen, Janzen, snake mimicry paper, you'll come up with a paper you can read, and there's all sorts of images associated with that. So to move on, it's long been regarded that this caterpillar, our elephant hawk moth caterpillar, is a snake mimic. So we've got the first two abdominal segments here with these eye-like marks on them, and they're expanded, and the thorax here will retract back within this first abdominal segment. So the whole thing sort of tapers down to the front end. You've got these expanded segments and the eye spots. And this is a friend's dog who found this caterpillar. So the dog found this caterpillar, started growling, scratching at the ground, clearing away vegetation. It was really quite perturbed by this thing. And here's a small elephant hawk moth caterpillar now, a different species, quite similar. They're both pink moths and similar looking caterpillars, but this one's got this sort of, the same features I've just shown you, but also this very reticulated pattern, rather like a snake. So that's about as far as it went in the British literature, but oh, there's this elephant hawk moth, I have to show that, it's beautiful. As far as it went in the literature, but I think we can take it a lot further than that. So this is a caterpillar of a moth called the dark spectacle. So this is quite a bit smaller. I mean, it's a reasonable sized moth, but it's quite a bit smaller than elephant hawk moth. And here we've got the second abdominal segment here, really expanded, quite dome shaped, and some yellow spots on the first abdominal segment tapering down to the front end. So the thing is that this is smaller than the elephant hawk moth now, and there really isn't the same surface area to have such quite an intricate design on it. So I think that you can extrapolate from the elephant hawk moth down to this, and I'm pretty sure that this is, its defense is snake mimicry. And it's not as perfect, but it's probably about as good as it can be, bearing in mind the size of the caterpillars. You've got this expanded domed segment here and the yellow spots tapering down. And I'll just throw in a picture of a snake while we're about it. It's a grass snake, obviously. It happens to have yellow spots here, but that's doesn't really matter what snake I showed you. I don't think these things generally are mimicking any particular snake. This is a much smaller moth again now. This is the rosy marbled. So again, we've got these bright coloured spots here. We've got an expanded area of the body here. So it's, it's wider. And if we look, oh, sorry, I thought I had a image from the side. But anyway, it's, if I show you an image from the side, you can see it's sort of bigger, not only bigger laterally, but also ventrally dorsally. So again, tapering down to the front, but it's, this is quite a pretty small caterpillar now. And this is caterpillar of the satin wave, again, a small caterpillar. And don't worry, you probably think I'm going mad now, but don't worry, because I'm not saying that looks like a snake as it is, because that it's not its normal resting posture. But I show it to you like this because on the 5th abdominal segment here, so you've got these flanges here. You have a little bit here, but this is much wider here on the 5th abdominal segment. And it rests normally with the front of the body all curled up underneath the back end. And so there we are. So these are the expanded flanges on the 5th abdominal segment, showing off these bright spots here, again, tapering down, but this time to the rear end of the caterpillar. So whatever's going on here, it's the same as the dark spectacle, but just at the other end of the body. I argue that it's snake mimicry. And what about this? That's a pretty good snake, isn't it? There's no eye spots here, but you have got a sort of convincing snake head shape at the front of the body. This is the blood vein moth now. So unusual shape for a caterpillar. And this one's the ribboned wave. So the ribboned wave's got this dark grayish brown body until the 5th abdominal segment, when again we've got these flanges bigger than on the other segment, and you've got a pale area here. So, and within that pale area is this like forked tongue appearance, and the forks of the tongue stretch into this expanded flange on the 5th abdominal segment. So I think that's a forked tongue mimic. And it's interesting, these last 3 examples I've shown you, the satin wave, the blood vein, and the ribboned wave, they're all in the same group of moths, all in the subfamily Sterinae of the Geometridae, and yet they've all developed snake mimicry in different ways. So the bright spots on the satin wave tapering to the rear, the expanded front end of the blood vein, and the forked tongue appearance on the ribboned wave. So it may be something about the habits of this particular group of caterpillars that made them particularly likely to evolve snake mimicry. And this one I've just thrown in now. This is the little thorn, and this one's got its bright spots here, but it hasn't really got an expanded segment. But what it does, it has this odd sort of posture, and it's been very difficult to get a photo of it. I'll have to have another go because this isn't entirely in focus. It sort of rests with this sort of part of the body raised up above the front and the rear end. So it's as if it's creating the impression that this bit of the body is bigger by putting it above the rest of the body rather than it being actually bigger. And then this is the swallowtail butterfly now. So this was in this country, it's confined to the Norfolk Broads, really, that sort of area. But occasionally continental swallowtails come over and they lay their eggs on carrots and that sort of thing, and larvae are found. But anyway, this was taken in Greece. So there it is. It's actually warningly coloured, this one. Most of these snake mimics are not warningly coloured. In fact, they look quite cryptic at a distance, and the snake mimicry becomes apparent at closer quarters. But anyway, there it is at rest. But if it's disturbed, it shoots out this structure known as an osmeterium from the 1st thoracic segment. And it's said to have an acrid smell. But to be honest with you, I reckon that's a pretty good forked tongue. And I think that the photons bouncing off that at 186,000 miles per second will hit the bird's retina much more quickly than molecules diffusing off it will hit the bird's nose. And to be honest, if the wind's in the wrong direction, those molecules are never going to get to the bird's nose anyway. So I think that the prime defense from this structure in my view, is snake mimicry. So, can we think of an example where there's an expanded section and a forked tongue? That would be really good, wouldn't it, if it had all those features? Well, we can. We're back to the lobster moth now. So this is a fully fed lobster moth caterpillar viewed from the rear. And you've got these expanded 7th and especially 8th abdominal segments and these tails like this. These tails are actually the anal claspers, which with the course of evolution have got modified into these tails. And there's another one there. And in fact, to be honest, that looks very cobra-like, doesn't it? But you might say to me, there aren't any cobras in Devon. And I'll say, well, that doesn't matter, because don't forget, most of our insectivorous birds spend most of their lives, or at least much of their lives, in tropical Africa, where snakes, including cobras, and even specialist arboreal bird-eating snakes are common. So it's remarkable, really, that the snakes in tropical Africa have influenced over evolutionary time the appearance of our caterpillars in this country. And I said to you that Professor Jansen had found various pupae that were mimicking snakes, and I think we have one too, but this is only one. It's the only one I can think of. So this is a pupa of the lilac beauty moth, and it's been made in a really exposed situation on this honeysuckle leaf with just a few strands of silk holding it there. It's, you know, the silk itself is not defending it in any way. It's just holding it in position. But it's the most unusual shape for a chrysalis. It's expanded in the middle, tapering to both ends. And at the head end, you've got these sort of eye-like appearances here. So again, you've got this sort of expanded section, tapering and eye spots. And it looks very much like some of the examples of snake mimicking pupae that Professor Jansen has in his paper. So, and it depends how far you want to take it, really. I mean, this is less convincing now. So this is a small fanfoot caterpillar. And on the 7th abdominal segment here, you've got these yellow spots. There's no particular tapering. This is the rear end, but they are near the rear end, these spots. And, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just got to be a little less likely to fall prey to a bird than an individual without those spots for these things to have evolved and get passed down the generations. So you have to make your own mind up on these things. All I can do is provide a coherent argument. So just to recap, the evidence for snake mimicry is circumstantial. The bird's fear of snakes is innate, not learnt. Birds hop around quickly, getting partially obscured views of the larvae. Birds cannot afford to make a mistake. So that's an important point, actually. You know, it's not worth risking it, because if they get it wrong, they've lost their life. Size doesn't matter with regard to snake mimicry. The smaller the larva, the less precise the mimicry, but it's probably as good as it can be. Snake mimicry readily evolves, and you've seen examples from 6 different families. Most examples are cryptic at a distance and seen as snake-like at close quarters. Insectivorous birds migrate to the tropics where snakes are commoner. And maintenance of mimicry does not depend upon model outnumbering the mimic. So you would expect with Batesian mimicry that the model to be more numerous than the species that's mimicking it. Otherwise, the deception would be uncovered. And finally, it's a low-cost defense. So it's just the pattern on the shape of the caterpillar. It doesn't depend upon the synthesis of expensive toxins or the growing of expensive hairs. Right, sorry, we're approaching an hour now, but I'll rattle on quite quickly. So this is the eyed hawk moth now, quite cryptic at rest, but if it's disturbed by a bird, shows off these eye spots on the hind wing, which hopefully will just scare it off. Here's another one, but you can actually see this one survived. You can see a beak mark here and another beak mark here. And you can see the beak marks extended onto the hind wing. But anyway, so the deception worked, and the bird must have been frightened off. This is a relative of the lobster moth, the puss moth. This is a first instar caterpillar. It's got these tails like the lobster moth, but this one has filaments within it, which it can shoot out like this when disturbed to scare off the predators. So this is like a scary larva, really. And there it is, resting upside down as it does. But if it's disturbed, then it shoots out its red filaments, shows off its red face, and has this gland here like the lobster moth did. And this one really does, if you give it a bit of a squeeze like a bird's beak would, does squirt out a couple of drops of really pungent formic acid. So it should be a pretty effective defense, really. And here we are, head on, here's the gland here, ready to squirt its formic acid, a really scary larva. There's the puss moth. This is an eyed hawk moth caterpillar now. So this is counter shading. So this is lit from the side, and you can see it's resting this way. This is how it rests, with the darker green on the underside of the caterpillar, which is on top. So it's the ventral surface, but it's the way it's resting upside down, it's on top, and the paler green here. So if it's lit from the top, so light coming from the bush down on the top will illuminate this more brightly than that. And so the whole thing will take on a rather uniform greenish appearance, looking flat, rather than a cylinder. When if you put a cylinder, you'd expect with the light coming in from the top that this bit to look brighter than this bit. So it gives it a flat appearance, rather like a leaf, not a cylinder. That's counter shading. And finally, to wind up with a twist to the tail. So this is a micromoth, Psyche castor. You may have seen these structures when you're walking around the countryside. They're very common. So this is the larval case of the caterpillar. So it pupates within the case. The male moth's a normal looking moth and flies around. And this is the female Psyche castor with no wings at all. She lays her eggs within the case that she came from. So I'll just show you this to orientate yourself to this group, the Psychidae, the family Psychidae of the bagworm moths. And I'm now going to tell you about this moth, Acantha psychiatra, which I've never seen. My friend Phil Sterling, who I co-wrote the book with, took these photos. So this is the male, normal looking moth resting on the case that it's come out of. This is another case here. This is the female moth. So the female moth, it depends really. If the caterpillar pupates head up like this, then the female moth is entombed, and the male comes along, mates, and she just spends the rest of her life within that case, and then the caterpillars come out in due course. But if it pupates head this way round, then all it can do is this peristaltic actions, and it sort of, the male actually will come along and mate, but it has to, it's got a very extensible abdomen, which has to sort of get in the case and stretch all around here to the tail end of the female. And then the female undergoes these peristaltic actions, and this one's partly out of the case, and it sort of drops to the ground like that. So the female moth has no scales, no antennae, no legs, no nothing really. It just looks like that. And it's a heathland species. And so on the sort of dark peaty soil, you think it was really utterly defenseless, or almost wanting to be eaten. Well, in fact, in the 1950s, somebody fed a number of these female Acantha psychiatra to a captive robin. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, some caterpillars started to emerge from the robin's droppings. The survival rate wasn't very good, but it may be that the survival rate would be better within the gut of a lizard or an amphibian on the heathland. We just don't know. But of course, you know, getting about distributing the species is really rather difficult for this moth. And if they can manage that through the gut of a vertebrate, well, all well and good. So that's a twist to the tail of defense mechanisms. It's almost as if it wants to be eaten. So that's it, really. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Barry. It's a real privilege to hear you talk about it, because it's, you know, you've got phenomenal knowledge, and amazing to see all these different ways of mimicking things for different reasons. I knew about a few as kind of biology student, but yeah, I had no idea that caterpillars mimic snakes, and that size didn't really matter, and really interesting to think about, you know, why that matters in a country where, you know, there are not that many snakes. So yeah, think about the kind of migratory effect, I suppose. It's really good. But yeah, in the comments, absolutely, there's they're just so beautiful to look at as well. There's so many different ones and loads to learn. So really, really appreciative of your talk. Thank you very, very much. And I guess when it comes to the Wildlife Warden scheme, our next event is next Monday. There's a wildlife quiz. So maybe we can get a caterpillar or two in. And just by Zoom. And then we've got the wildlife warden sort of induction training, or just, we call it what's a wildlife warden, just so that it's just a kind of friendly introduction to what it's all about. But yeah, do give me a shout if you need anything, and this or want to find out anything more. But really great thanks to you, Barry, and yeah, hopefully we'll cross paths again. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I'm sorry it went on a little bit longer, but I just, you know, it's always difficult to know how long these things are going to last.
Oh no, it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. Thank you. Good. Well, I'll see you again.
Okay.
Bye then.
Thanks very much. Bye.